Hey guys, welcome to the TBR journey. My name is Heather and today I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. I know that it's now the middle of October and I'm a little late in putting this wrap up, but I didn't have a chance to do it before now, so let's just jump straight in. The first book that I read in September was actually a collection of samples from BuzzBook's 2015 Young Adult Fall/Winter collection, which is published by Publishers Lunch. There was a variety of stories in this and I enjoyed the majority of them, and I have actually gone out and purchased some of the books that are out already or requested ones that weren't, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the stories actually continue. Overall, I gave the collection 4 stars out of 5 because I did enjoy most of them and it was well worth picking up. The next book that I read in September was Baba Yaga's Assistant by Marika Makula and illustrated by Emily Carroll. This is a middle grade graphic novel that I picked up because I'm actually interested in the Baba Yaga lore at the moment. I was a little disappointed in this in that Baba Yaga doesn't feature as much as I had hoped, but it is still a very enjoyable story and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was A Crack in Everything by Ruth Francis Long. I picked this one up because I was sent the sequel and I really enjoyed it. It's an urban fantasy set in Ireland and it follows a young girl called Izzy as she discovers that her life is not as normal as it appeared before. I really enjoyed this book and overall I gave it 4 stars out of 5. The next book that I read was Zeros by Scott Westerfeld, Margot Lanigan and Deborah Biancotti. This is a superhero kind of novel where a group of teenagers have certain powers and they all interconnect and kind of feed off each other. It was very interesting and I loved the way that the characters all interacted and their lives all kind of weaved together, and it's different to any kind of superhero novel that I've read before, so I really enjoyed this one and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Mrs. Ravenback's Way by William M. Ackers. This one is, I think it's a middle grade book, I'm not entirely sure. It's told from the perspective of the teacher, who is a German woman teaching in America, and she believes very firmly in order and discipline and that children should obey their teachers and that teachers come before parents and all this kind of thing. And it was very interesting to see the structure of the teacher's narrative compared to the child Toby Wilcox's narrative, which is told purely through sketches and diagrams from his journal that they are making in class. Overall, I found this one very amusing, seeing the kind of battle of wills between the teacher and the student, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Lost in Geeklandia by E.J. Russell. This is an adult romance novel set in a more geekier kind of world than most people would want, I believe. Judging from the other reviews on this book, I personally loved it, but judging from the other reviews, people don't tend to get the language of it. It's very programmery and nerdy, and as I say, personally I loved it, but other people, they didn't seem to get it the same way. But I found it to be a very cute, warm, fuzzy kind of feeling romance, so I really enjoyed this one, as you can probably tell, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Missing Melissa by Aretha Thomas. This is the story of a 22-year-old girl called Melissa who is determined to find her missing twin who disappeared when they were 3 years old after a carjacking, but the events are kind of murky, and as the investigation reopens, it's clear that her parents are hiding things from her. I really enjoyed the way that the story focused on the investigation and the clues and the little bits and pieces of things that you can pick up from her past that reveal answers in the present. There was one little thing I didn't like about this book, and it was the relationship between Melissa and the investigating officer. I just felt it was too unrealistic in that the minute he saw her, he was like, she's amazing, she's beautiful, and I need to be with her. And I felt it was very unprofessional of him in that he kind of acted on that straight away. It was basically a case of insta-love, and it put me off a little bit. But the investigation itself and the rest of the story was all fantastic, and the characters and the way they all interacted was brilliant. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Firsts by Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. This is the story of a young girl who has a dark past, I would say, and to make herself feel like she's in control of her life now, and to also give girls the best first time that they can get, she basically takes boys from her school's virginity with the agreement that they will give their girlfriends the best first time possible, and nobody finds out about this kind of operation that she's running. Now, I really enjoyed this. I thought that she was obviously flawed in her ideal, but I could understand why she was doing this. She wants to give the girls the perfect first time that she never got herself. And it was interesting to see how she developed as a character as things started to go wrong, and what her relationship was like with her new friends as well. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars just because it was so good. The next book that I read was one of the very first graphic novels that I've ever picked up, and that was Saga Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Everybody and their mother seems to have read Saga and absolutely loves it, and I am now one of those people. I sat down and read this one, devoured it really, really quickly, and then instantly passed it to my boyfriend, who I got to read it, and we now own all 5 volumes that there is, and we've now read all 5 volumes that there is as well. But this was just a fantastic story. It's basically a love story, a forbidden love story between 2 opposing enemies, and there's a war between their races, and they've come together and they now have this child which is basically being hunted alongside themselves as they try to just escape and live a free life. I absolutely loved this book and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Outcast Volume 1, A Darkness Surrounds Him by Robert Kirkman and Paul Azaceta. I'm very sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. This one is by the same creator of The Walking Dead, so it's very dark and creepy and gory as well. It's kind of like a mix, I would say, between The Walking Dead and Poltergeist, in that this is more dealing with demon possessions by the looks of it. It was interesting. I wasn't really following the story that well, but I think that this is one that I do want to continue. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars just because I couldn't follow it as easily as I did with Saga, for example. The next book that I read was Witches by Scott Snyder and Jock. This one is definitely the creepiest graphic novel that I have read, and it's got such a good creepy art style. It's kind of like a mix between a sketch and a final product pieced together, but this basically, the tagline for this is a pledge, and if you are pledged, there is no escaping, and it is downright terrifying. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars just because it freaked the crap out of me, and I really enjoyed it at the same time. The next one that I read was The Sculptor by Scott McCloud. This is a mammoth, massive book, but it is so good. I flew through this in an hour or 2 maybe. Basically, the main character in this story is a failing artist who's not getting any recognition for the work that he's doing, and he makes a deal with death that he will become a fantastic artist, but obviously it comes at a price, and just as it seems that he's getting everything that he ever wanted, that price is paid. This was a fantastic novel and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Rat Queens Volume 1, Sass and Sorcery by Curtis J. Weeb and Rock Upchurch. This was a great novel. I really like the art style in this one. Basically, it follows a group of 4 girls that are bandits or miscreants, really. They like to cause havoc and mayhem, but they also like to protect their kingdom and their friends. But this one was a really quick read and really fun. I really like the character of Baby Betty, who's this one here. This is definitely one I'll be picking up the second volume for, and I look forward to reading the rest of this series. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next graphic novel that I read was Low Volume 1, A Delirium of Hope by Rick Remember and Greg Ticini. This one was a little different. It follows the story of a woman 10 years after her husband is murdered and her daughters are taken. The culture that they live in is underwater, but this woman believes that she has found a viable air source that will sustain them, and she is willing to risk her life and her delinquent son's life in getting up to the surface to test this. This was a good story. I didn't enjoy it as much as the other ones, and for that reason I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in September was A Hollow in the Hills by Ruth Francis Long. This is the sequel to A Crack in Everything, and I absolutely love this one. It continues the story perfectly, and it adds new tension and new drama and new characters, and everything about it was just brilliant. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next one that I read was Falling by Emma Kavanagh. This is another crime thriller about a plane crash and the surviving victims. It's really interesting to see how the different families all connect and their stories all combine, and I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars just because it was absolutely brilliant. The next book that I read was Darkroom by Tom Becker, This is the newest book in the Red Eye series from Stripes Publishing. I really enjoyed this one. It was something a bit different to what I was expecting, so it was a nice surprise when we got to the end and found out what had actually happened. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Anatomy of Melancholy by Matthew Selwyn. This one, I believe I've just missed the point completely of it. Everybody seems to absolutely love it, but I really just didn't. The narrative was too crass for me, too vulgar in its depiction, and I didn't like the way that women were represented in this book. They were basically just walking, talking boobs and legs and whatever, and I understand why this was used, but I just didn't enjoy the book because of this. And it did really confuse me up until about the last 20 pages or so when I finally kind of wrapped my head around what had happened. So this is not really one that I enjoyed, and for that reason I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Unexpected Gifts by S.R. Mallory. This one was a kind of historical novel. Basically, it jumped between the present, where a girl and her mother are looking through the kind of family history, and then each alternating chapter has a member of her family, or granddad or grandmother. It was interesting. I think that the chapters from the past were better written and more interesting than the present ones. Really didn't like the main character. Sonia was basically just a walkover or a pushover. She just let things happen to her, and I didn't connect with her at all. And it kind of brought the story down for me. I really enjoyed the historical events and the ancestor chapters. It was just the present day chapters that I just really didn't enjoy. For that reason, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read in September was Superman Red Sun by Mark Miller and Dave Johnson. This is basically Superman's origin story where he lands in America, but instead of landing in America, he lands in Soviet Russia. And it basically just follows the events that what would have happened if that was true. I found it really interesting to see this kind of alternate reality to what could have been. And it was really interesting to see the differences and also the similarities as well. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. So that is all the books that I read during the month of September. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I will see you soon.